Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. I'm just kidding. I am going to try to draw the human anatomy again, proportionally creating my own video this time. We'll see if I ever do this again. But I want to go through a couple other details that maybe were missed by the last demonstration, by the last video that you were to watch in your last assignment. Just some other things that might help make the movement and pose a little bit more complete. So bear with me. I'm my Muppet voice, and we'll get started here. So I've chosen this person right here that I've printed out. He's playing some really mean electric guitar, and we're going to kind of break down again using that stick figure that you learned about in the last video yesterday, how we can draw the human anatomy using a more complex stick figure. So one thing I want you to remember are some of the proportions that you learned about in 2 assignments ago when we talked about how the human form is between 7 to 8 heads tall and the width of the shoulders is about 2 heads wide. So keep that in mind as you're drawing this. I'm going to start with just my head, and I can draw that head any size I want. I just have to remember that the rest of my drawing is going to be 8 times that. The length of my drawing is going to be 8 times that. So I'm going to start off with my head, just a simple oval. I'm not worried about any kind of facial features or putting the ear on there or hair yet. I just want to get the head. So I'm going to start with my oval. Remember, always keeping your pressure of your pencil really, really light, because you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, but that's how you're going to build up those lines that you do want to keep. Okay, so I'm not putting tons of pressure. You can see how many times I've drawn that circle over and over again until I get kind of what I'm looking for. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what the shape of his neck looks like. Imagine his vertebrae coming down, and it's kind of coming off the back of it. There's a slight, he's got his head pushed forward a little bit and bent slightly. So I'm going to put that little line coming out from like as a vertebrae from the back of his neck. And then you imagine the other guy, he talked about how the curve of the spine in there. So imagine if his spine was going through his body, kind of creates a little bit of a slope or a diagonal line to that. So from that neck, it's going to kind of curve back, almost like an S curve back. So I'm going to put that spine in his body, just a little slight curve to it, the way his head's kind of pushed forward and his curves back. Remember that we have the shoulders, and we're just going to draw that as a line too. So the width of the shoulders is 2 heads wide. So if I take this measurement, 1, 2, I should be able to get the width of the body to be fairly proportionate. One thing I noticed is that his shoulders are kind of bent at a slope. So I'm going to look at that line and kind of recreate that same slope. So I have that there. Remember from the last video how the last person put circles to create the shoulders as well. So I'm going to put those balls or circles on the ends of the line to know where my shoulders are. If you also remember the length of your body, remember where your rib cage would end? His rib cage would end about right here. So I'm getting about 2 heads long for that as well. Again, always using the head as my measurement system. So I'm going to measure from here, 1, so I got 1, 2. So his rib cage should end about right here. So I'm going to create this kind of box. His body is kind of bent at a slope here, so I'm going to kind of follow that same design. The way his ribs are kind of sticking this way, and I kind of get that same design. Now boys and girls are going to be a little bit differently, just because girls are built differently than boys. Boys are going to have a more of a straight waistline, and girls are going to be, like you might have heard this before, the hourglass figure, and that's just because of the way our anatomy has to be so we can birth children. So their hips are going to be a little wider. So depending on the gender that you're drawing, you might have to make those little corrections as you go as well. So I have that vertebrae. It goes and extends beyond my rib cage, and I see it extending here. This time, unlike the person in the last video, they just had you draw this as just a rectangle. I'm going to actually have you draw this as a triangle this time, because that is actually the shape of the skeletal system of the pelvis. So you imagine like a triangle here where the pelvis is, and it's kind of rocked to the side here. So I'm going to draw a triangle. So far I've had my circle, I've drawn my shoulders as circles, this kind of rectangular trapezoid shape as the rib cage, and then the triangle as my triangles, or my hip, I should say. And now I'm going to start drawing where I know that the legs are going to go. So I know my hip's going to come out of this joint right here. My hip bone is. I see that my leg here is extended kind of outwards, and it just is kind of straight, pretty much straight. So I'm going to imagine my knee is going to be halfway between the beginning point and the ending point, with my foot at the very end of that. I'm going to kind of draw that as like a little triangle. I also know that I'm going to put my other leg in here, and this is going to extend this direction. Again, with my knee probably a little higher than this circle, so that's one thing I probably need to adjust, is that this leg's going to be a little bit higher than the last one, just because this leg is kind of propped up with his foot here. So I have it bent here, and then it's going to come back. His foot is, he's kind of resting on the ball of his foot here, so I'm also going to draw that as a line too. So here's his foot, but then his foot is also bent there as well. Okay, they're also kind of on the same similar plane as well. So now I'm going to look at his arms. And one thing I know about the arms is that when I'm drawing the top of the arm, I know that that's about the length of my rib cage. So my elbow is going to come all the way down to where my rib cage is, and you can check that out on your own anatomy if you'd like. So that arm kind of comes straight down. It bends at where the rib cage is slightly, and then he is creating that cool pose with the air guitar here. And I'm just going to draw his hand. It's just like a little circle for right now. His other arm extends out this way. It bends, again, thinking about the length of my rib cage here, so I probably should extend it just a little bit longer, knowing that those are going to be about the same lengths. And then I'm going to have it going upwards, and this time I'm just going to kind of draw like a little triangle, because his hands are a little bit more up, even though his fingers are kind of curled over, which I'll add into later. So what I think, once you have that basic skeletal figure of the simple shapes, the circles and the rectangles and triangles, what you need to do now is kind of start adding the muscle and the skin and the fat and all those other layers that make up human anatomy. Right now, think of this as like a basic skeletal system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill out that neck a little bit more. I know that my shoulders are going to be a little bit more rounded. That's one reason why I did draw them as circles on the side. I think about my arm, and my upper arm is going to be a lot thicker. So when I draw this around here, I'm going to draw it as an oval, but on one end I'm going to make it slightly thicker, just because I know that that muscle mass is going to be much stronger up here where the bicep is. Same thing with this arm here. I'm going to get rid of him for a second. This arm right here is going to, almost like I'm drawing a little hot dog around it, but also noticing that I'm making it a little bit thicker here, where the forearm has a little bit more muscle mass there. Okay. Again, like I said before, with whether it's a male or whether it's a female anatomy, if it's a male anatomy, these are going to kind of come down pretty straight. If it's a female anatomy, it's going to widen up a little bit more. The hip line or waistline is going to be a little bit wider. So I'm going to keep this pretty generic. I'm just going to connect this kind of trapezoid rectangle shape to my pelvis, or the triangle shape of the pelvis, and leave it at that as just my waistline there. I'm going to go ahead and fill in my other arm. Again, adding that muscle mass a little heavier when I'm kind of circling it around with my oval. Again, another oval on this side. Again, making the muscle mass a little bit wider here, and then it narrows as it gets to the wrist. Okay, and then when it comes to the legs, one thing I would suggest doing is that from the pelvis bone where the thigh would be, is starting here and then creating kind of an oval or an upside down arch shape, a U shape, however you would like to say it or see it, and it'll kind of create your thigh and add all the muscle mass there. Same thing going to my other leg. I'm going to create that U shape and connect it to my hip bone here, so I have that top part of my leg or my thigh. When I come down to the calf muscles, again, knowing that when I'm running, my calf muscles are a little bit thicker here under the knee, so it's going to be thicker, and it's going to narrow when it gets down to that foot a little bit more. Same thing for this one. It's going to narrow. I'm going to put that oval around it again, but then make it a little bit narrower when it gets to my foot. Here, I'm going to kind of bend it around to make the bend in the foot. And now I have a pretty complete shape for a person who's kind of playing a cool air guitar. Once you get your drawing to this point, what you can do, and you've built up all those layers, is I would suggest going in, and if you drew it light enough, you should be able to erase that inner skeleton that you drew before. And that's when you can go in and start adding details like clothes and things like that. For today, I'm fine. I might make it an assignment later on to draw a form where you have to add clothes to it, or keep the drawing from this lesson and we might add clothes on it tomorrow. But right now I just want you to select one pose from the bottom of your Google form and begin drawing and trying to capture the pose that's represented. There's a ballet dancer, there's a basketball dancer, and there's also a person running, I believe. So eventually what you can do, once you've erased out all those shapes, is you can outline a little bit darker. You can still see the same skeletal system from my original drawing here, the underlying drawing, but you can go in and it looks like a more proportionate person or figure, rather than just, you know, like a little South Park character or a little circle with a square body and stick limbs. So I think we can go a lot further from a pose like this and have a little bit more movement in it if we try this method using that stick figure. So let's go ahead and get your paper out and get started.